Hi, Michael Bettine here once again, and today I'm going to delve into some deep topics. I've got my whiteboard, and we'll be investigating what I do. It's probably one of the most asked questions I get. What do you do? So, today we're going to talk about myths and methodology right here on It's Cuppa Time. Got a lot to talk about today. Got some notes, I got my whiteboard, and I really want to go through some interesting things. All this information was on my website before, but I took it down because people could read it, but they wouldn't get the context of where I was coming from. So today I want to get into the context. I alluded to in a couple videos back about how I don't teach my methodology to people because it wouldn't work for them. And I think that's a real important thing to understand. I do what I do. It works for me. It's my idea. But to have somebody else try to do the same thing I do, it just wouldn't work, because what I actually do is very personal, and it's built upon years and years of study of alchemy and mysticism, which I first got interested in the mid to late 1970s. So I've got a lot of background in those areas. An important thing to understand is most everything I do is filled with symbolism. If you read my blog, if you've watched these videos, if you listen to the recordings I have, read anything I've written, there's a lot of symbolism in there. And a lot of it is hidden symbolism. It's not overt right out there. It's stuff for the people who will pick it up, they'll pick it up and they'll understand it. And that goes back in a long tradition of alchemy and mysticism where things weren't out in the open. They were often hidden in codes or things like that. But everything I do has symbols to it. So it's kind of a mystery. If you want to go back through all my materials, see what you can find out. If you find something, write to me and we'll see, what it's all about, if you've got it right or not. So anyway, symbolism, to me, that is a big thing. But before we get into that, I want to talk about people, anyone who's playing gongs, bowls, or bells. You have to have some sort of plan. You have to have some idea of what you're actually doing. I've talked before about how, people just seem to be randomly hitting the gongs and playing and all that, and how I just don't really get on with that. I think it's important to have some sort of methodology that you work from. Now, as you know, if you've known me for any length of time or gone through any of my materials, I'm not a big fan of the chakra systems and Western notes assigned to them. I don't work that way. I'm not a big fan of the whole planetary thing and having planetary gongs or bowls or tuning forks or things like that. I know a lot of people who work that way. I've actually worked with people who work that way, but that's, as I've said before, that's not my thing. I don't work with any of that because I see that as fixed systems. And I don't see anything as being fixed. I see everything as being fluid and ever-changing. So that's a big part of what I do. So let's talk about what I work with. Coming from an alchemical background, I work with the 5 basic elements. So let's take a look at what they are. First one I work with is Earth, which is represented like this. The next one I work with is Air, which is the opposite. Then I work with Water, and finally Fire. So we have Earth, Air, Fire, Water. And Fire. Now there is a 5th element, and we'll get into this, that I work with. This would be Ether. And sometimes that is just represented as a circle, sort of the eternal. But these 3 or 4 are represented by triangle shapes, and they're opposites. And you can see we have Earth and Air. So we have sort of below and above, we have Water and Fire, opposites there. So in what I do, I've developed a methodology based around the 5 elements. I should put this in here. Ether. So let's look at these 2 other things I work with. I do like the planets, but I work with 2 of the 7 planetary metals. And the first one is Jupiter. And the second one is Venus. Now, alchemically, Venus equals copper, and Jupiter equals tin. And not so surprisingly, those are the 2 elements in bronze, which most of our instruments are made of. Other than the nickel-silver Paiste gongs, all my instruments are made of some sort of copper and tin alloy, bronze. And what we can consider these are archetypal symbols. Earth, air, water, fire. Definitely archetypes of important things to us. Now let's look at them. Earth is a grounding spirit. If you think of your feet on the earth and holding you here, it's grounding. Air is a calming spirit, swirling around. Water is a cleansing spirit, and so many of our ceremonies have some sort of water involved, washing us, cleansing us. And then fire is a creative spirit. And you can think of that as, in like the Catholic Church, the Holy Spirit is often thought of as fire, tongues of fire or the fire. And in other religions and different sects and that, fire is thought of as cleansing. You will often burn things in fire to cleanse yourself of them, to release them. Like you could write down your negative thoughts or things like that, burn them, and that releases it, cleanses you from it. Now, ether is often thought of as being everything surrounding these and sort of the heavens. But we'll get into some of the different methodologies of different groups and how they look at this. But these are the basic elements that I like to work with. So I have an earth gong, an air gong, a water gong, a fire gong, and an ether gong. And I do own a Jupiter and a Venus planet gong. But you have to understand, for me, this is all symbolic. Like the earth gong, these could be any gongs of mine. Like behind here is a Pisces earth gong. I usually use that as the earth gong, but sometimes I'll use a different one. Because these are symbolic representations. So they could be any instruments of mine. They could be bowls, they could be bells, they could be shakers, they could be gongs. But for the most part, I work with 5 different gongs representing these basic elements. And for me, it's not important that the people I'm presenting the session for know any of this. It doesn't really matter. I could be working with 5 different types of pizza. Sausage, pepperoni, margarita, vegetable, and pineapple pizzas. I mean, it doesn't matter because these are merely representations that I use to guide myself. So that's really what's, I think, the crux of this and the most important thing to understand with. These are archetypal symbols, and I use them as representations to guide what I'm doing. They're not actual forces I'm necessarily working with. I don't necessarily think that, okay, I'm working with water right now, some sort of water force. I'm working with the idea of water and what it represents to me. So if I gave this to somebody else and said, okay, here, why don't you go work a session with this? It's not necessarily going to work for them because, again, there's no context to this. And maybe they don't identify with any of this. Like I said, I don't identify with the chakras and Western notes. I don't identify with the whole planetary gong tuning fork thing at all. And I never use either of those methods. A lot of people do, and that's what they identify with, and that is fine. So it's important. I want to, say, while I disagree with other methods, I understand that other people use them and build their whole thing around them, and that's great. It just doesn't work for me. But this is what works for me. So archetypal elements, we can find these all through history. They're pretty fascinating. I got all kinds of notes here, so let me get... So what I think is important is finding the instruments that resonate to you, and then finding what they mean to you, what they represent to you. So I have a lot of different gongs and bowls and bells. I have hundreds of instruments, and some of them I assign these sort of archetypes to, others I don't. It's really, how I feel about certain instruments. And I think it's also important to realize that even if I'm feeling water and I'm playing my water gong, that someone else might not be feeling that, receiving that. And that's okay. Because an important thing to me is I present what I do, and I put no judgment on it, and I put no conditions on it. And I present it sort of as an offering, and I allow people to take what they need from it. I play a lot of different sounds. I use a lot of different instruments, different rhythms, things like that. And I allow people to take what they need from it. I'm certainly not going to say, this is a heart chakra bowl and this is going to affect your heart, because I don't believe in all that. I really see things as being much more fluid. And I noticed that, on different days, I'll gravitate towards different instruments because I'm feeling them more, or I like to tune into the people and I might be feeling something from them that says, oh, this gong or this bowl or this bell is needed more, and I'll concentrate on that. So to me, it's being very open to everything that's going on around me. And a big part of that goes back to, again, my alchemical background, mysticism background, and also just sort of who I am and how I function in this world. And it started when I was very young, and I thought everybody was like me. And as I started growing up, especially once I got into school, I learned that nobody else was like me. I had very different thoughts and very different feelings about everything. So I find navigating the world to be a challenge for me. And even being a musician, I find that I respond to the music differently than most other people, to the tones or sounds, to the timing, and things like that. I, as a drummer for well over 50 years now, I find that I respond to rhythm in a completely different way than most other people do. And so for a long time, I had difficulty in relating to situations until I finally learned, oh, they're thinking of it this way, I'm thinking of it that way. So a lot of this is just innate with the way I operate, the way I feel, the way I navigate my way through the world, through life. So again, for me to teach this to somebody else, I think would be useless. So, because they're not like me. So when I do teach, I try to help people find what is inherently themselves and set them on that path, as opposed to saying, well, this is what I do and copy what I do. This is my methodology. Copy it and you'll be great and fine and wonderful, because it doesn't work. I try to help people find themselves, and I think that's much more important than turning out copies and clones of what I do. So let's look at gongs and the elements here. Way back in the 5th century BC, the philosopher, scientist, and healer Empedocles came up with his tetrasomia, or doctrine of the 4 elements. And he described how all matter is comprised of these roots, these elements, the earth, air, water, and fire. And they all interacted with each other. Then Aristotle, who everybody's probably heard of, later added a 5th element, ether, which he described as what the heavens were made of. So we have these 5 basic elements. And while these 4, earth, air, water, and fire, are earthly elements, the 5th one is heavenly. So there's that sort of separation there. Now in other cultures, they also had the elements. The Buddhist elements were also earth, air, water, and fire. But they had a 5th element, which they called akasa. And that refers to the void, or a state of emptiness. Kind of relating to the Buddhist state of non-being. So it's a little different because they don't have this in Buddhism, we don't have this idea of heaven like you would have in Christianity or Islam or Judaism or many of the other, Western religions. So the idea is of emptiness, of the void, which basically is the same idea. It covers everything outside of these four elements. Now, the classical Chinese elements were a little different. They're wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. And with earth, in the Chinese way, they would have earth in the center with the other four elements around it. And they interact with each other. And their description is more as a transforming or transformation. They work in cycles that are ongoing and interacting. So slightly different there. But we can see these, these are archetypes found in different cultures around the world. And not necessarily, taken from each other, but very much archetypes. And you can see this in many other cultures. Now, the chakra system we're most familiar with, and there are a lot of different chakra systems. It contains 7 chakras. So we have 4 lower ones, the root, sacral, solar plexus, and heart, which connect up to the 4 earthly elements. And then we have the 3 upper chakras, throat, brow, and crown, and they connect with ether or heaven. So again, these things align with the classical idea of the 5 elements. So we have the lower chakras and the upper chakras. We also have 4 or 5 elements found all over the place. But again, they're archetypes. Okay, so if we go back through Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, we have 4 archangels that align with the 4 elements. We have Archangel Michael is fire. Archangel Gabriel is water. Archangel Raphael is air. And Archangel Uriel is earth. So as we can see, these are popular archetypes throughout different cultures. So in my work, I use gongs centered around these 5 elements. But instead of concentrating all the vibrations to one area, I really prefer to present them as a spectrum. It's, it's just the way I see things. I see things more as a wider spectrum of things. And it's my, just my own interpretation of how this is. And again, it's sort of offering people everything and take what you need from this. Sometimes people fall asleep right away, sleep through the whole session. I've had people do that, wake up at the end of the session and say, that was fantastic. I've had people who've said, I've had insomnia for a couple months, haven't been able to sleep. This is the best sleep I have had. Thank you. So obviously, that's what they took from what I was presenting. Deep sleep. Other people have told me other things, but it's taking what they need. So I don't try to force things on people because I don't believe in that. Okay, so again, we've got the Jupiter and the Venus that I work with, representing tin and copper, which is bronze. I love metal. I don't have any crystal singing bowls, and I doubt I ever will have any crystal singing bowls unless somebody gives me one, because I do not resonate to the crystal. It just doesn't speak to me. I have a lot of friends who have crystal bowls and play them. I've done concerts and sessions with crystal bowl players. I have no problem working with them. But for me, I do not resonate with the crystal. But give me bronze or nickel silver or brass, or, just give me metal from the earth, and I resonate with it. I mean, this goes back 50 years or so when I discovered gongs and everything else. And right away, it was like, whoa, something's here. So for me, metal is the big thing that I really resonate with. So let's look at methodology and using it and what I do. In my session, I take a journey. And it's a journey through these elements, archetypes, however you want to describe them. I take a journey. Okay, so let's go through how I do a session. I open up playing on the bowls and bells, and I describe that as the calling. If you think of Sundays and church bells, churches ring all their bells. Why? To tell people it's time to come to church, come to service. And bells have been used for centuries as a calling. Even gongs, too. Gongs have been used as a calling to call people to come for meetings, for gatherings, things like that. So my opening, I refer to as the calling, because I'm calling everybody there. It's time to come. And I'm looking at a journey. We're going on a journey. And again, it doesn't matter that I'm not telling them about this. It doesn't matter. What I'm describing is purely how I work through this and create a pattern, create this sort of soundscape I do. And to me, it's a journey, and it's a journey through the 5 elements. So, the calling. Let's go. Everybody, pay attention. Come on, we're going. Then I might bring in different animal sounds. I like to work with things that represent animals, because that's kind of a waking up. And then I have a gong that I designate as fire that I call the portal gong, opening portals to the other 4 realms. So I will use the portal gong to open things up. And surprisingly, or not surprisingly, I've had people say, that felt like a portal. So that's always interesting. When you played that gong, that felt like a portal or a doorway or something. And that is my intent. Open a portal. First we go to the earth, because it's grounding. It's where we live. And we want to be grounded. We want to feel this steadiness, this wholeness, however you want to describe it. So I bring everyone to the earth. And we go down into the earth. And that's a big mythology sort of thing. If you've studied any mythology, I'm not going to delve into that, but that's another sort of archetype of going into the earth. So we do that. We go down into the earth. And from there, we move into the water, the oceans. We come up the bottom of the ocean, and we meet the sea creatures. And I will make sounds to represent the sea creatures. Then we are in the water, and it's very cleansing. After we've been in the earth, the water is cleansing. From there, and each time I'm using the portal gong to bring us to a different realm. And the portal gong, and then we go to the air, and we are above everything. We can look down and see the water and the earth. We are above, and there are birds and things up there. And then from there, we go into the ether, the heavens, the void, however you want to look at it. This other state, this other worldly realm that is different than the earthly realms. And in there, I feel like, I'm bringing this up higher and higher. And you could say it's sort of a moving through the chakras, coming from the lower chakras all the way up and going to the crown chakra. You could say it's that sort of thing. I think it's very similar to that. But I'm working at, moving up. And then we get to the ether, the heavens. And hopefully our consciousness has been raised some. And I like to stay there a while and then let it dissipate. Just sort of dissipate. And everything's just sort of floating and dissipating. And I'm playing bell sounds. And there's this lightness in what I'm doing. And then we have sort of another calling, bringing us back to Earth, where our physical body is. So there's a second calling with bells and that, bringing us back. And I'm still playing ether bells, I guess you could say, up above, and playing earthly bells down below. So kind of calling us back. And then we return to Earth, and we return to where we are and who we are. And we feel grounded once again. And then the session is ended. So that is sort of my methodology. But again, if I just presented this to you and gave you sheets of information and said, okay, here, this is how you do it, it wouldn't make any sense because you might not relate to any of this. Whereas this is what I relate to. This is how I see everything, how I see the world in many ways. But again, it's not important to me that the people that I'm playing for know any of this, know any of it, or know that I'm doing it. That's not important. What's important is I use it as a tool, as a visualization for myself to present the sounds and to move in some sort of an orderly fashion. Now, sometimes I'll do them in different orders. It's not always the same. It's usually, though, earth first and ether last, but I might move around because, again, for me, everything is fluid. I don't want to do everything exactly the same way every time because I'm feeling different. The people are different. The room I'm playing in is different. So those are the three things that I work with, in this physical realm is how am I feeling? How are the people feeling? What intentions do they bring? How does the room sound? Am I in a tiny room with a compact sound? Am I in a big room with a big ceiling and hard walls and mirrors or something, and the sound is very expansive and a lot of reverb in there? So I will, work differently every time. And as far as the instruments I use, sometimes I'll change them out. I might be packing up and spy something in my studio and go, I think that sound is needed today, and bring that, substitute it for something else. I might bring instruments that I don't play. Sometimes there's gongs and bells and that I don't even touch because they're not calling out to me and I'm not feeling them. So for me, it's this sort of a basic plan or outline, but then it's all improvised. And I have a big background in improvised music, so that helps. But I think you have to have some sort of a plan, however you define it, instead of just getting up there and randomly playing, which I see too many people doing, and it does nothing for me. When I see somebody up there who has some sort of a plan, I'm drawn into it. So I know, that's me. Maybe it doesn't matter to you. Maybe just getting up there and playing any old thing is fine with you, and it's fine for you to hear somebody else do that. That doesn't work for me. I like to have more conscious intent in everything. And that's a big thing with me, is having this intent. And it's just how I deal with things and how I see everything. So there we go. I've had a lot of people ask me, and often after a session, I have people ask me, "Oh, what are you doing up there? And how are you doing this? And do you improvise, or is that all laid out?" And that, and I'll usually go into a basic description of what I do. Really never covering all this because that would take too much time, but yeah, that's how I work. I like to have some sort of an outline, and these are the things that interest me. I like alchemy, I like mythology, I like things like that. So these are the type of symbols I prefer to work with. And you might prefer to work with something else, which is perfectly fine. So, thanks a lot for listening, and hope you got something out of this. I hope, if nothing else, it's spurred you on to create your own sort of methodology, to stop and think and go, maybe I need a plan instead of just getting up there and playing, to have some sort of a plan. So if it does, great. And I hope it works for you. Let me know if you come up with something. Let me know if any of this makes sense to you or not. Put it in the comments below. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you like my video series, click subscribe down below. And I will see you next time on It's Cuppa Time.